So we are about to do a unit in class of drawing those casts that I printed out. So I thought we could do a drawing of a copy of someone else's cast drawing in preparation. And this is by an Italian artist from the 1500s named Tintoretto. And he's actually doing a drawing from a Michelangelo sculpture. And I like that this sort of has an exaggerated perspective. And that's going to be useful for us in convincing you that three-quarter view heads do indeed require an understanding of perspective in order to successfully draw, because we can see if we go through the center of the eyes and then through the corners of the mouth, we have some very strongly converging orthogonals. Now, the strength of this convergence, can everyone appreciate that it gives us a feeling that we're really close to this object? Because this is how it would look from a very short distance. If you were further away, those orthogonals would not be converging so dramatically. And you can maybe understand that if you think of, like if you were very close to a house, to a large house, you would have these strong perspective effects, right? Like, doesn't this drawing feel like we're really close to the object? And if we were looking at the same house from much further away, from the same eye level and everything, but just a lot further away, we might have much less dramatic perspective, forced perspective. You see that? This is like the same house seen from the same eye level, and they're drawn the same size, but this one is implying vanishing points that are way, way off outside the frame, and this one is implying vanishing points that are closer together. And when you imply vanishing points that are closer together, you give an impression of being much closer to the object. Usually we like to take photographs from a little further away, so we're not forcing perspective so much. But I think for learning how to draw a three-quarter view head, it'll be kind of useful to study this forced perspective, because when you're a little further away from a head, you can often miss that those are converging at all, and that's usually you get a really bad result. So let's block this in as he's got quite a mop of hair. Let's just try doing, let's look for the cranium and move this a little further away. Okay, so we're looking for the cranium, the face, and the line of the eyes. Oops, not quite that tilted, maybe more like this. We want the eyes to be sort of centered on the head. And another orthogonal that would be really useful to study is this one. You see the bottom of the chin? So we've got this tilting down this way, and this one is tilting up this way. And I'm starting this drawing with a little bit of just sort of an anatomical understanding. I think I got to pull the jaw back. I'm going to plant the neck right near the back of the cranium. There are a lot of different ways to start drawings. I'm starting this one with just a really quick understanding of the underlying anatomical structure. But I'm going to move directly from there into the blocking in the what's called the envelope or the outside of this form. So I'm going to draw it on here first so you can see the shape, and then I'm going to talk us through drawing it. And this is the simplest two-dimensional form that I can find in this head. So I already know this angle. I think I can already see the line of my eyes might need to come down a little because I want this to kick out right about here. This angle could be a little shallower. This is dead vertical. I'm going to notice that the overall distance from here to here, this distance is about the same as the distance from here to here. So we're going to start comparing angles and distances. This is about a 45-degree angle. Notice that the hair is extending way past where we kind of mapped out for the skull to be, because he's got a lot of hair. And at that workshop I attended recently, it was interesting to see how he blocks everything in with this series of lines, and he referred to that as dither. Dither is a manufacturing term for, leaving room for margin of error. So I found that to be a useful thing to try. You're sort of signaling to yourself that you're not 100% committed to any of these lines yet. And what I'm going to do now is I'm looking across from here to see where I land on this side. And I can see that I've got a little problem, which is this needs to extend down more. So I'm going to move that down. And another trick is always looking for similar angles. Well, I'm not seeing a lot yet. This is about 30 degrees from vertical, maybe 20, and then this is about 30 down here. So this is a time to look rapidly back and forth between your drawing and what's on the screen, and just ask yourself if the shape feels similarly proportioned. And if it doesn't, try to identify where it doesn't. I'm going to show you an error that I just noticed in my drawing, which some of you may have copied. See, if I extend this line, I'm ending up really close to this one. And if I extend it on here, I've got more space. So that's sort of giving me a clue that I made this line segment a little too long, and the neck as a result looks too thin. So that kind of correction is part of the process. Everybody take a minute and just try to find at least one error in your shape and make a correction. This is a little frustrating because I'm used to giving myself clues right away about what the three-dimensional form is, and we don't have a lot right here yet. But we're going to quickly move into shadow mapping and give ourselves a little more to work with. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this line but I'm leaving this line of the eyes because this angle is really important. This is the main thing I want everyone to get right, is this angle and contrasting it with this angle. These are our main converging orthogonals. So it's going to be really important to accurately locate the bridge of the nose. So why don't I'm going to pull a plumb line straight down. And when you're drawing an actual cast, you're going to have plumb lines, so you can actually do this physically with a little string with a weight on it. But you see what I just did? I just related the thing I'm trying to find, which is where's the bridge of the nose. I just related it to this point that I already found, which is sort of the tip of the chin. So I'm going to go straight up from there, and that's going to give me an idea of where to put this most important plane change right here where the nose transitions to the eye socket. And I'm still giving myself a little dither room to feel my way through it. I'm looking at this angle it's created between these two planes. And now I'm going to refine some of my creating into smaller sections. So let's get rid of that, and let's look at a little more of a granular level what's happening. And it's really doing something like that. So we're going to go from this angling in towards the line of the eyes. And then I'm asking myself right here, is this vertical? No, it's kicking a little bit out to the right. And then I'm asking myself, is this vertical? No, it's kicking back to the left. So neither one of these is vertical, but they're both really close. I'm drawing a little darker than you have to because you need to see what I'm doing on my screen. And now I'm going to block in the actual line of the nose, simplifying it into like this. And I'm going to notice that, see, the line of the cheek here is parallel to the bridge of the nose. And then this kicks out. And something like that. Because it's so easy to screw up the length of the nose, I'm going to take a little measurement. I know where this point is. I know where this point is. I know where the bottom of the chin is. I know where this intersection is, this indent. And when I measure, it looks like the bottom of the nose is about in the middle of here. Can you see that? So check that on your work. Make sure that this distance from here to here is about the same as that distance from there to there. And if it isn't, you got to scooch something around. Having found the bottom of the nose, I know that my line between my lips is about 1/3 of the way between here and here. And this is another converging orthogonal. So for everyone who just hated drawing buildings, hopefully you're just a little more comfortable working with these orthogonals, and you can apply that experience to the more interesting job of drawing people. I'm guessing that few of you without this training would think to set up a drawing like this way. And I already sort of know where my jawline is. And my ear has to sit inside this corner. And the last really important placement is where are we going to put this eye? And one way to think about it is if we just pull a line, pull a horizontal right through that eye. Whoops. So let's just pull a horizontal through here. Here's the eye socket on this side. Here's the back of the ear. And if we go to the middle of this line, where do we end up? And I would say we end up right about at the outside corner, near the outside corner of this eye. So what I just did was I made a line across here to here, and I found the middle of it. You can check your work like this, and that's going to tell me where to put the outside corner of this eye. Remember, those eyes are on this kind of line, which I just erased, but so we're basically going to block this eye in to this space way out here, and the other eye is going to have to fit in this much smaller space. I'm going to just do some random details. If I know where the inside corner of this eye is, that's going to help me place the back of the ala, like that. And the corner of the mouth also pretty much lines up with the inside corner of this eye. So that's going to be like that. Bottom lip. And I need a little more width across the bottom of the chin. So now it's sort of blocked in enough to think about shadow mapping. I'm going to use a different color to draw the shadow map right on this reference. So I'm going to clean up my red lines, which I feel like we're done with, and I'm going to move my drawing out of the way for just a second so I can use my drawing surface here. So we have a big major shadow shape here, major shadow shape here, and this is continuous with the shadow on the neck, and there's some smaller shadow shapes up in the hair. I will come around and look at these in a minute. I'm just creating the shadow map on here so you can see it really easily. And that pretty much accounts for everything. So I'm going to now try to relate these forms to the blocking in that I've already done. Remember that upper lip's in shadow. This is a cast shadow under the bottom lip. And again, I'm drawing this pretty dark. You could make it much lighter in your drawing. And this is really a process of abstracting. Like, we're not thinking of, oh, how do you shade an eye? How do you shade a nose? We're thinking of this as if we were cartographers, literally like drawing a map of a country or the boundaries of a river or a lake, which is of course why we call it shadow mapping. And we're still going to have a lot of ability to move these forms around after the first shading, but it's just going to, our brains, remember, are just going to start to register it all as three-dimensional after that first shading has been done. So we're going to have a huge advantage in a minute. So there's my completed shadow map, and since most of you are right-handed and Tintoretto was obviously right-handed, I'm going to shade backwards. And this is really the fun part, is seeing what we've done suddenly just pop into relief once that first value is knocked in. And this is the phase of the drawing where we want to clean things up. Because moving a form is right now is just a matter of like moving one of these boundaries around. So if anything isn't reading correctly, guess what? You have not invested much time in any of these features, so you can just erase a boundary, move a boundary, and you're not really redrawing a whole lot. So I'm going to erase this shadow map so you can see a little more easily how what you're doing compares to the original by Tintoretto. And I'm going to pause the video recording now so I can come around and take a look. So I think we're ready to commit a little, and we're about to stop using our sort of big global assessment tools and move into using some more micro assessment tools. When I was walking around the room, I just noticed that I put the top, this earlobe a little high, and maybe the nose a little low. These should end up at about the same level. So, ready or not, we are going to take a much closer look at some of the features of this drawing. And I'm going to just pause for a minute, zooming in, and I want you to appreciate just how little is there. Like, it's a really good illusion of an eye, but there's really not much to it. And that's the marvel whenever you look at a drawing by an old master, is like you back away and it's like looks just like an eye, and then you get up close and you're like, wait a second, there's really hardly anything there. So our challenge is going to be to draw that eye and not add anything to it. Don't draw a lash line. Don't. Let's try to keep it as simple and as elegant in our drawings as it is in his. So I'm going to get my camera a little closer, and this is where I'm going to use the eraser. Some of you went a little hard on your outlines of your shadow map. This would be the time to soften those outlines. You still want to see where your shading is, and here's the real marvel, is this little dark right here. Look at how this shadow of the eye socket and this shadow of the inside of the eyelid come so close together, and between them you get the feeling of that eyelid like curving up and around. This shadow gets a little darker near the bottom. You see that? And that gives a feeling of that. You feel that reflected light inside the eyelid. And then we're going to do a little shading, a little soft shading coming down under the eyelid, and a little shading at the fold above the eyelid. And when I was in art school, that my teachers always insisted that this full kind of form between the eyelid and the eyebrow was called by the great masters would call it the sausage, which I still have a hard time believing, but so there's just a little bit of shading on the sausage, and we've got this little shadow shape under the lower lid. And here's the real miracle, is like, see the white of the eye? It's just barely shaded, just a few strokes like this, but it's shaded just enough so that this shelf of this lower lid really looks three-dimensional. It looks just a little brighter than what's above it. And then this shading comes around the eye socket, and that's about all there is to it. I've actually made it a little crisper than the original, which I just, it's different drawing tools. He's probably using black chalk, and I'm using graphite, so I'm just sort of leaning into what my pencil wants to do, but that's that. I think I'm going to move on. I think I'm going to pause, actually. I just want to give you a minute to catch up. Pause this again. Okay. The other eye, there's even less there. Can you see that? It's like there's a shadow shape here. There's a shadow under the lid. And there's a little indication of where the fold is. And that's it. A little halftone again on the so-called sausage to bring out that lid, and a little halftone on the white of the eye right under the lid. But that's it. Okay, I'm going to zoom out a little. And I'm going to refine this contour. So I'm going to first take away my blocking in, and then I'm going to block it in with a little more dither and a little more gentle touches of the pencil. And we can see there's a little bit of halftone on this cheek. And now that I'm drawing this thinking in terms of curves, I again probably want to get rid of my blocking in and just draw this curve of the cheek right over where the line was. And you see how different it feels to be really zeroed in on an area, which is an experience that I can give you very easily, sort of artificially with the zoom of the camera, but which, when you're actually drawing something, understand there's two really different mindsets. One is where you're attempting to look at the whole thing and organize all the large relationships of the parts, which is understood by psychologists as a gestalt, what they call a gestalt kind of looking, where you're seeing the relationships more than the parts. And the other way of seeing is looking at the details, which is what we're doing now. But you want to always know in your brain like what you're doing. Like, am I trying to organize the parts, or am I trying to capture the details? And the mistake most beginners make is they just jump right into the details because this is more satisfying, and they do all these beautiful details and then they don't fit together right because they didn't bother to organize the parts before they started. Now I'm really a little confused right here. I want to indicate a nostril, but I honestly can't see one. What I do see is that my shadow mapping has to be a little softer under the nose because this cast shadow edge is not too sharp. Look at how perfectly the philtrum is brought out just by the way this cast shadow moves across it, and this little tiny halftone at the corner. And you feel like you're seeing into this structures almost photographically, but there's hardly anything there. Right here I can see that I brought my shadow map too close to the edge of the face, so I'm going to bring that in And again, like I really want to go in and bring out that line between the lips, just like I want to bring out the nostril. But amazingly, it really isn't there. It's just like it's like our brains are telling us that we see all the details, and then you get up close and you're like, oh, these details are not present. Tintoretto did not draw them. Notice that this little accent at the core of the mouth is what makes her look so contented. And if we come down towards the chin, we can see we need to sort of soften the edges of this shadow shape. And along here, erase the map again because I want to have a little more of a gradual transition. And here's where we see some really clear form shading. Remember that the initial direction was this way, and yet you see how these shading lines are coming around the jaw and trailing up into the side of the face very clearly. I'll zoom out so you can see that a little better. See that? This is the initial direction, but now we're using that contour shading direction to show that plane change. And then here's where you can see that there are some beautiful halftones in this drawing, by which I mean like this side of the cheek, there is shading on it. And that's where that dynamic pressure is so important, because you got to go dark enough here so that now if we go dark enough in the main shadow, now we can shade lightly up here without competing with the actual shadow shapes. And that's the danger, is if your shadows aren't dark enough, then it's like an overexposed photograph. You've got to blow out your highlights, which means you can't even touch an area like this without threatening to have these halftones compete with your shadows. But if your shadows are dark enough, then you can shade your halftones without worrying about losing your overall light and dark relationships. Okay. So we're going to back out again, take a look at the big effects that we're achieving. And I've got a little bit of shadow falling onto the neck on this side of the chin, which I didn't do yet. And the chin really stands out because of this dark shadow around it. Notice that the bridge of the nose of my drawing across here looks a little too broad, and that's just because I didn't bring this halftone close enough. and I just sort of tightened it up. And that's really where the goal here is that drawing, you want it to feel like sculpting, like you're actually just pushing and pulling these forms around. And I think that's an easier thing to conceptualize if you're actually drawing, as we are now, like a sculpture. This is Tintoretto, like I said, was drawing a Michelangelo sculpture. So our understanding of these forms is very much indebted to Michelangelo himself. This little halftone above the cheekbone is kind of important to bring out, if you conceptualize where the cheekbone is under the eye socket. We're shading above it a little and we're shading below it a little. Not too dark. And then going much darker here behind the ear. So there's a little more light on that ear than I noticed when I first shadow mapped. I just did a first shading right over it. So I'm going to pull that light out. And with the curls on the head, I want you to notice just how flat some of these areas are. You don't need to shade, you don't need to bring out every form, but it's the way that the shadow edges curve at their boundaries that gives us a sense of what the hair is doing. So it's really at the terminator between the light and the shade that all the interesting action is happening, and that's all it takes to really bring out a sense of the curls. I'm getting a little lost right here. Here's this dark, and then I didn't shadow map this little bit of light behind it. So again, I'm lifting that out. When I was in grad school doing a lot of cast drawing, I would just get really upset when it came time to do the hair. It just seemed like a lot of trouble for not much payoff. But the thing I came to realize that really distinguished the poorer works from the better ones is that amateurs will just like give all their attention to features and sort of neglect the other forms, and the real professionals, they'll like barely touch some of the features and then go into like tremendous detail in the hair and the clothing and stuff like that. And it's sort of, I think it gives your drawing a more professional look if you can really try to exercise a lot of restraint and simplicity in the things that all beginners think are like the important parts, and then devote a little extra care and attention to the things like up here that people often don't even bother doing. So you'll notice all this, there's an illusion there's a lot going on in here, but there really isn't. It's like this boundary and this boundary is what's causing us to feel like we're seeing hair in this big empty spot in between. And then there's this weird little curl with a dark shadow behind it right here. Not much to it, but it adds something. And I'm just feeling now that I really sort of, in my shadow map, I indicated that a little too much height for the hairline. So I'm just going to block that in a little lower. Move this shadow shape down. And then we'll sort of dive into the rest of the hair in a minute after I take another break. So we're going to complete this drawing with one more look at the hair. Again, there's an illusion that there's a lot going on up here, but there really isn't a whole lot going on. So what I'm going to try to do is, first of all, get rid of some of my blocking. I can still see where it was, but I don't obviously want a bunch of straight lines there. And I'm going to replace it with some of these overlapping curved lines. And it's frustrating because, like, if you tried to copy every curl exactly, you could go really crazy. And what I'm after right here is just sort of the effect. So that's already better. Students ask me every year, like, when are you going to teach us how to do hair? And there are just so many different approaches. But I know that the best artists usually got an idea of how to draw hair mainly by copying casts like this, because the biggest error in drawing hair is to think of hair as a bunch of individual hairs. And since sculptors working in clay or marble obviously can't sculpt individual hairs, they have to simplify the form into simplified three-dimensional forms that are basically represent like locks of hair and clumps of hair and clusters of hair. So if you draw a few casts and then you take your understanding that you get from doing this and impose it on like a drawing of an actual person, you're going to come out ahead. And I still got a little too high of a forehead. I don't know how that happened, but drop this down a little more. And then notice that these locks are casting shadows onto the forehead like that. So there's a change in shading direction for the cast shadows, and that's about as far as I'm going to take this drawing. A few of you didn't have this angle quite right, and I just noticed that I didn't either. It's a little more of an extreme angle. So maybe you were just copying me. His neck is so long because I think he's considered a Mannerist. After the Renaissance, the Mannerists came in and they saw the very slight exaggerations in Michelangelo's work, and they thought, you know, wouldn't it be cool if we exaggerate things even more. Yeah, so it's definitely an intentional stylistic move.
I can't figure out like how he's in this position.
He might not be. It might not be possible.
I think it is possible. Like I'm trying.
Yeah, well, a lot of mannerists would get movement into their poses by drawing some of the pose in one position, and then they'd have the model move, and they would combine in a sort of slightly impossible way, like position of the neck with the position of the head, and that's why the drawing has so much movement. The goal was to create like a real dynamic feeling and a lot of movement, and it definitely succeeds in that. An example of mannerism today would be like Marvel Comics. I mean, like it's all about telling a story and having a tremendous amount of dynamic movement and energy, but obviously things aren't all, completely realistic. Okay, to those watching the video, thank you. I'm going to stop now.